A Benton County grand jury today has issued indictments in 3 criminal cases involving sexual abuse and child endangerment.
Gary and Elizabeth Cers accused of sexually abusing a child together, as 2 of their family members also face charges related to sexually abusing children. I'll take you inside the investigation, how these people are related, where the children are now, and what Cers family members are saying.
Benton County Grand Jury has just leveled some of the most disturbing charges Ohio has seen in years, and every new detail makes the picture darker. Gary Cers Jr. and his wife Elizabeth are behind bars, accused of sexually abusing a child together. 2 more family members are now facing their own sex crimes charges. And somewhere in the middle of it all, investigators found 16 children living in a single house on Omar Street. This is the story of how a DNA warrant cracked open a case nobody expected. Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers have been sitting in a Benton County jail cell since June 30th, and they are not walking out anytime soon. Prosecutors say both of them committed sex crimes against a minor more than a decade younger than they were over a 9-month stretch beginning in January of 2022. At the time, Elizabeth was 29. Gary Jeter was 32. And during part of that period, Elizabeth was pregnant with twins who died the same day they were born. The victim in this case is not one of the couple's own children, but a relative. Both Gary Jeter and Elizabeth now face 4 felony counts, each 2 counts of sexual battery and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, all 3rd-degree felonies.
I have new details for you about this incredibly disturbing sexual abuse investigation into Gary Cers Jr. and his wife, Elizabeth Cers, and the investigation that started it all. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth have been in jail since June 30th, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. I can tell you that. Both are now charged with sex crimes against a minor who was more than 10 years younger than they were from January to September 2022. That's when the alleged abuse took place. At that time, Elizabeth would have been 29 years old and Gary Jr. would have been 32, and Elizabeth was pregnant with twins during part of that time. Those twins died the same day they were born. Gary Jr. and Elizabeth face 4 felony charges, 2 counts of sexual battery. Those are felonies in the 3rd degree, and 2 counts of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, also 3rd-degree felonies. The alleged victim in this case is not one of Gary Jr. and Elizabeth's children, but they are related to the victim. And the victim was quite young when the alleged abuse took place over 9 months in 2022. Here's the Benton County prosecutor discussing the charges after the grand jury returned the indictment. He talks about the reason why law enforcement went to the home on Omar Street on June 30th with a search warrant.
Here's where it gets complicated, because this case did not start with Gary Jr. and Elizabeth at all. It started somewhere else entirely and led investigators back to them almost by accident. Rewind to December of 2025. The Benton County Sheriff's Office asked the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigation's Special Victims Unit to look into allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. That's investigation number 1.
Ryan Kane.
A grand jury today has issued indictments in 3 criminal cases involving sexual abuse and child endangerment. These charges stem from criminal investigations conducted by the Benton County Sheriff's Office and the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Investigations, BCI. The cases are being prosecuted by the Benton County Prosecutor's Office with the assistance from the Highland County Prosecutor's Office and the Ohio Attorney General's Special Prosecutions Unit. In December of 2025, at the request of the Benton County Sheriff's Office, BCI's Special Victims Unit opened an investigation into allegations of sexual abuse involving 2 children. Information obtained in this investigation prompted BCI in March of 26 to open a second investigation, this one involving allegations of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor. On June 30th, authorities executed a search warrant at a residence in Hamden, Ohio, and Benton County on Omar Street. There have been a lot of speculation and questions regarding the June 30th presence on Omar Street in Hamden. These indictments provide some insight into the ongoing investigation. However, to preserve the integrity of the ongoing investigation and to protect the victims, I conclude my statement here. I am thankful for the work of my deputies and our fellow partners at BCI.
Then, in March of 2026, something in that first investigation leads BCI to open a second case, this one centered on allegations of unlawful sexual conduct with a minor, and this is the case that leads straight to Gary Cers Jr. Investigators needed his DNA for genetic testing. It took them nearly 4 months to track him down. When they finally did, on June 30th, they showed up at a residence in Hampton, Ohio on Omar Street with a search warrant for his DNA.
These cases began as an investigation into family child sex abuse. Law enforcement sought the DNA of Gary Cers Jr. related to the child sex abuse case. Once Cers Jr. was located, search warrants were executed to secure his DNA for genetic testing. Upon serving the search warrants for the child sex abuse case, the existence and condition of the 16 children at the Omar Street house became known. The child sex abuse cases involve intra-family relations and do not pose a risk to the general public, and I would also add, does not involve human trafficking. This case all started with diligent Dollar General clerks calling authorities with concerns over children they observed. We ask the public to be mindful of the circumstances around them, especially involving children. We continue to ask for the public's respect for the rights and privacy of the child victims in this case. I'd like to add a thank you to the Vinton County Sheriff's Office and BCI for their investigative efforts, which have been amazing. This case is going to be prosecuted by myself, Kara Key.
And that's when everything changed. Because when deputies walked through that door to collect a DNA sample, they found 16 children living inside, ranging in age from 1.5 to 18 years old, and according to officials, in bad
Kara
shape.
Keating, Assistant Attorney General, and Annika Collins, Highland County Prosecuting Attorney. Thank you.
So let's break down what William Archer said. He said they went to the house on Omar Street on June 30th with a warrant for Gary Cers Jr.'s DNA. They wanted his DNA so they could conduct genetic testing. Why conduct genetic testing? Did the alleged victim in this case possibly have DNA evidence that she shared with investigators? Or was a child possibly born as a result of this abuse? The Attorney General says the investigation into Gary Jr. and Elizabeth started in March of 2026. The search warrant on Omar Street wasn't executed until June 30th, nearly 4 months later. Clearly, they had trouble tracking down Gary Jr. and Elizabeth. They were not easy to find. But when they did, they tracked them to the house on Omar Street, and that is where they found the 16 Cers children, ranging in age from 1.5 to 18, in bad shape. Now, I'll get back to the child endangering investigation involving the
16 kids in one house, that number alone should stop you. But the story of how this all came together is even messier than the headline. Go back to that first investigation, the one that started in December 2025. It centered on two men, 23-year-old Josh Saunders and 40-year-old Brandon Henderson. Here's how they connect to the Cers family. Josh Saunders is Gary Jr.'s nephew.
So in December 2025, the Vinton County Sheriff and BCI started investigating allegations of sexual abuse of 2 children. And remember, the prosecutor said alert Dollar General clerks called and reported concerns they had over children that they saw. Well, that first investigation involved 2 men. Those men are 23-year-old Josh Saunders and 40-year-old Brandon Henderson. You might be wondering, who are these 2 men and how are they connected to the Cers? Well, I'm going to tell you. Josh Saunders is Gary Jr.'s nephew. He's the oldest son of Gary Jr.'s sister, Virginia, who goes by Jenny. And Brandon Henderson is her longtime boyfriend and the father of some of her children. Brandon,
the oldest son of Gary Jr.'s sister, Virginia, who goes by Jenny. Brandon Henderson is Virginia's longtime boyfriend and the father of some of her children. The family has bounced between Gallia County, Benton County, and Bloomer, Wisconsin, which lines up with previous reporting that the Cers family had spent time in Wisconsin too.
Brandon and Virginia have lived in Gallia County, Vinton County, and Bloomer, Wisconsin. The Vinton County prosecutor had said previously that the Cers had lived for a time in Wisconsin. This may be the reason why. While Virginia Saunders has been with Brandon Henderson for many years, she is still legally married to Josh Saunders' father. Records show that Joshua Saunders and Virginia Saunders were married in April 2003 in Gallia County, but Joshua Saunders Jr. is actually serving time in an Ohio prison for murder. He's been behind bars since—
Here's a wrinkle worth sitting with. Virginia Saunders has been with Brandon Henderson for years, but she is still legally married to someone else. Joshua Saunders' son, who is currently serving time in an Ohio prison for murder and has been since 2009. Back in 2016, Virginia publicly called Brandon her soulmate on Facebook. At some point, the family moved back to Ohio from Wisconsin, and earlier this year, a Gallia County court actually ordered Brandon Henderson and Joshua Saunders Jr. to undergo paternity testing so child support could be sorted out for some of Virginia's kids who are no longer in her custody.
Behind bars since 2009. In 2016, Virginia Saunders described Brandon Henderson on Facebook as her soulmate and her other half. At some point, they moved back to Ohio from Wisconsin. And earlier this year, Brandon Henderson and Joshua Saunders Jr. were ordered by a court in Gallia County to take part in paternity testing for Virginia's children, so child support could be paid to care for some of the children. Those children are no longer in Virginia's custody. The grand jury indicted.
Now to the charges. The grand jury indicted Josh Saunders on 4 counts, 3 counts of rape, 1 count of gross sexual
The
imposition.
grand jury indicted 23-year-old Josh Saunders on 4 counts, 3 counts of rape, and 1 count of gross sexual imposition. The indictment claims that Josh Saunders raped a 9-year-old child between January 2020 and December 2020. There's a second rape charge that claims a child between the ages of 10 and 12 was sexually assaulted between December 2020 and December 2023, a 3-year period. And a third rape charge covers an allegation of sexual assault between June 2022 and June 2023.
The allegations span years. A 9-year-old victim in 2020, a second child between ages 10 and 12 assaulted over a 3-year window, and a third assault alleged between 2022 and 2023. Brandon Henderson faces 21 counts total, including multiple counts of endangering children, gross sexual imposition, and 8 counts of sexual battery, spanning what prosecutors describe as years of alleged abuse.
The grand jury indicted Brandon Henderson on 21 counts. 1 count of endangering children, 2 counts of endangering children, 4 counts of gross sexual imposition, 4 counts of gross sexual imposition, 8 counts of sexual battery, 2 counts of endangering children, and those were misdemeanors. Brandon Henderson faces charges related to allegations of sex crimes involving a child over a period of many years.
So step back and look at what investigators are now piecing together: 3 separate victims across 2 investigations, plus 16 additional children swept up in a child endangerment case that grew out of the search for Gary Cers Jr.'s DNA. Legal analysts who've reviewed the case say the genetic testing itself is
And Mark
telling.
Weaver, he sits as a special prosecutor in the state of Ohio, sometimes sits as a judge as well, and has prosecuted many sex crimes cases. Mark, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, this case just gets more complicated and complex all the time.
Complicated, complex, and disturbing, more disturbing than we originally thought. I think you and I both suspected when BCI was involved in this, there might be a sex crimes aspect to this. But now we're learning that there are extended family members to the Siders who have now been indicted on sex crimes charges. Those are Brandon Henderson and Josh Saunders. So they were like investigation number 1 that started this whole thing. What is your reaction to that?
It makes more sense now. There were some people thinking that a misdemeanor public indecency case was what triggered this. We know now that's not true. BCI wouldn't have been involved in something like that. BCI is brought in for serious felony level cases like these sex offenses. I do need an organizational chart to know how all these people are related and who's who. It's a little confusing in that respect.
There are really only 2 reasons investigators typically seek DNA like this: either to match physical evidence, like fluid on clothing or bedding preserved from an assault, or to establish a biological relationship that could elevate a charge, because under Ohio law, a parent or someone acting as a parent who engages in sexual conduct with a child faces enhanced liability.
But any adult who is either a parent or guardian, or someone acting as a parent or guardian, does have special responsibilities and can be charged if there's any sexual activity or sexual conduct, 2 different things under Ohio law, with one of those children.
And it does appear now, in my reading of all of the documents and all of the records and the press releases and piecing this all together, that we have 3 victims here. We have 2 initial victims in investigation 1, and then 1 victim in investigation 2, and that is the victim involving Gary Cers Jr.
Whether that means the alleged victim in Gary Jr.'s case became pregnant remains an open, unconfirmed question, one investigators may have been trying to answer with that
Cers
warrant.
Jr. and Elizabeth Siders. And so they went to the house looking for Gary Cers Jr.'s DNA for genetic testing. Mark, what does that tell you? I mean, that says to me, I'm wondering if the victim in this case became pregnant.
That's possible, although that's not one of the elements of any of these crimes. As I mentioned, one of the elements, certainly for sexual battery, is whether or not you're a parent or acting in the role of a parent of somebody, and you would have sexual activity with that child. That could have been the reason. We now know, you mentioned the 3 victims. Those are in addition to, obviously, the numerous children who were found, 16 children found, who are all their own kind of victims in the first piece of this iceberg that we looked at.
Mm-hmm. And so why else would they go for genetic testing for Gary Jr.? I mean, they went there on June 30th with a warrant for genetic DNA for genetic testing. Is there any other reason that they would do that for genetic testing in your mind as a prosecutor, other than if the person who was sexually abused gave birth to
As for Elizabeth Cers, it's worth being precise about what her charges actually require. Prosecutors would have to prove she was an active participant, not simply someone who knew and stayed silent. Ohio law does allow for a separate complicity charge when someone helps a crime happen without directly committing it, and child endangerment can apply to someone who's aware of harm to a child and does nothing. But the sexual battery and unlawful sexual conduct charges she's facing require meeting every element of the crime itself.
Gary Cers Jr. and Elizabeth Cers both face sexual battery charges related to a child. They're both charged with that, along with unlawful sexual misconduct or conduct with a minor. So does that, if you're a prosecutor, for Elizabeth to be charged with that, does that mean she was an active participant in this sexual misconduct, or was she simply aware of it?
You have to be more than aware to be guilty of those crimes. If they wanted to charge a complicity charge, they could do that. It's a different way of saying, well, you didn't do it, but you were involved in helping it happen. But to be guilty of the charge, you have to meet all the elements, and simply being aware of it, other than the child endangering piece, which being aware of something that's being done to a child and doing nothing about it, obviously can be child endangering. But for these sex crimes, you have to be guilty of each of the elements of the sex.
Then there's the 16 children found at the Omar Street house. Those child endangerment charges were originally filed at the second-degree felony level for Gary Cers and other adults in the home, the level that carries up to 8 years in prison. But several have since been reduced to third-degree felonies or even misdemeanors.
Of the sex crime, and being aware of it is not one of those elements.
Let's move on now to the child endangering charges involving the 16 Cers children who are now in therapeutic foster care. Those were all second-degree felonies when they were first charged. Now some of those are second-degree felonies, some are third, some are misdemeanor counts, both for Gary and Elizabeth, and then Grandma and Grandpa. What do you make of those charges being reduced in some respects? I mean, they're still charged with it, and they're innocent until proven guilty, but they're not all F2s anymore.
Yeah, the difference in these charges is the damage done to the victim. And so the more damage, the higher potential to get up to the F2, which is up to 8 years in prison. There's also a misdemeanor level child endangerment.
That's not unusual on its own. Ohio law scales these charges to the degree of psychological or physical harm prosecutors can actually prove, and that evidence takes time to develop. All 16 children are now in therapeutic foster care. One detail investigators and family members alike have been careful to stress: as of now, none of the 16 Cers children found in the home are alleged victims of sexual abuse themselves.
What's so disturbing about this is the fact that we have family members, and they're saying right now that the 16 Cers children, that nobody is accused of sexually abusing them. Thank goodness, if there's a silver lining in this, that has not happened according to what we're being told right now. However, there are other children, extended family members of the Cers, who prosecutors are saying were sexually abused at the hands of Gary and Elizabeth, and what appears to be Gary's nephew, Joshua Saunders, and his brother-in-law, the longtime boyfriend of his sister, Virginia. So this is very disturbing. And we had heard there was this Wisconsin connection, Bloomer, Wisconsin. When they first arrested them, they said this family had been up in Bloomer, Wisconsin, or Wisconsin at one point in time. And now we're seeing that Virginia and Brandon at one point lived in Bloomer, Wisconsin. So that's where this connection came together, it looks like.
The sexual abuse allegations involve 3 other children, relatives connected through Gary Jr., Elizabeth Josh Saunders, and Brandon Henderson. The Ohio Attorney General's office says the investigation is far from finished. Given how tangled this family tree already is, a convicted murderer still legally married to one relative, a paternity dispute tied to a different branch, and charges against 4 separate adults stemming from 2 separate investigations that only collided because of a DNA warrant, it would be surprising if this were the last round of indictments.
That's that level of crime.
The Attorney General has said, we're not done yet. This investigation is still underway. So do you see more charges coming, or do you think this is it and they're just still kind of dotting their I's and crossing their T's?
I know Attorney General Wilson. He's a career prosecutor. I don't think he would have said that if it were true. This does bring to mind another case that you covered that many of your viewers have watched out of Ohio, out of southern Ohio, which was the Pike County murder case, which continues to go on. And that was not immediately apparent as to who was who and who was responsible for several weeks to know all the different implications. And that once again was a large family who were doing horrible things to each other and to children. And so in that case, it took then Attorney General Mike DeWine, who's now the Ohio governor, a long time to help sort through exactly all the possible charges. We could be seeing that happen in this case as well.
Attorneys for at least one defendant are already pushing back, pointing out that the charge count against Gary Cers Jr. has dropped sharply since the case was first filed, from 17 second-degree felonies down to 10 third-degree felonies and 6 misdemeanors, and arguing that the case built against their client is still very much in motion.
The wife for Joey Russell, the brother of Elizabeth Siders, posted on Facebook that if the allegations about Elizabeth are proven true, that they are basically done with Elizabeth, that you cannot harm children. And the attorney for Gary Siders Sr. issued a statement saying, "What we do know is that the original complaint filed against Mr. Siders Sr. charged him with 17 felonies of the second degree. The amended complaint filed 2 days later listed 16 felonies of the second degree, and the indictment just handed down by the grand jury, in a process where the defense has no ability to participate or present evidence whatsoever, handed down only 10 felonies of the lesser third degree and 6 misdemeanor counts. It is certainly interesting that over a span of a month and a half, the number and severity of the charges against Mr. Siders Sr. has already continued to decrease significantly, with the state already admitting that further investigation continues to be necessary and ongoing, and the defense's investigation still yet to truly begin in earnest." And we're going to continue to follow this case and bring you the latest information as
What's not in dispute is the scale of what investigators walked into on Omar Street and how a single warrant for one man's DNA ended up exposing a family network prosecutors say spans 2 states and multiple generations of alleged abuse.
Yeah, it's going to require a lot of investigation, a lot of explanation for these connections. You, of course, were a reporter in Wisconsin, so you're well suited to report on this case, and knowing Ohio as well as you do. This is a crooked, rotten family tree, and figuring out which branch got involved with which other branch is going to be quite a difficult thing for first investigators and then prosecutors to do.
I don't want to get over my skis here, but is it surprising to you that the mother of the children is not somehow implicated? Is it possible that she was just in the dark about all of this?
That's possible. Certainly prosecutors want to bring as many charges as they possibly can. Under the rules of ethics, you have to have probable cause to believe that a charge is well-founded, and so prosecutors do have that bar to clear. But typically, we want to bring every charge we can bring to use as leverage so we can flip one defendant against another. So you would think if the mother had complicity of any sort, that she would have been charged in that way.
This case is still developing, more charges may still come, and the people responsible for 16 displaced children and at least 3 alleged victims are only now beginning to face a courtroom. Everyone named here is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty, and will keep following this case as it moves through the system.